Something I've noticed as a neurodivergent who's also a therapist who works with neurodivergent clients is that we're often a strange combination of resilience and frailty. This is because we are a marginalized population. We grow up under structural oppression, under ableism, and we often have to adapt as best we can. We try to be resilient with whatever resources we have available to us. And a lot of the times, our adaptations are helpful. For example, in school, if you're bullied, avoiding other people who are going to pick on you, isolating yourself by going to the school library can keep you safe. And that can work within that context. However, if you leave that school, you graduate, and you go into the world, and you continue to avoid and isolate, it becomes maladaptive a lot of the time because it's keeping you stunted and stuck and doesn't give you opportunities for growth, learning, development. And it can help you maintain that feeling of safety, but the kind of normative development you would go through in relationship to other people doesn't happen. You don't get to practice neurotypical social skills, which are essential, living in a neurotypical environment. Not to say that you have to broadly adopt those, but it helps to speak both your language as a neurodivergent and the language of neurotypicals in social situations. So that resilience, those adaptive mechanisms that you use to survive oppression, are signs of real strength and flexibility of mind. If you stick to them, it then becomes evidence of rigidity of thinking or rigid thought patterns. And it can serve you up to a point, and then beyond that, not. And it's kind of like I would compare it to developing a really hard shell, but you're all gooey inside and liable to collapse at any kind of pressure once that shell is penetrated. So, for example, I have rigid routines that I follow because I know it keeps me sane and safe. And every time I leave the safety of my bedroom or the comfort of my home, I'm anticipating something uncertain, unpredictable, possibly catastrophic happening. Now, I don't necessarily have any cause to believe that, but then I think the gods of fate are going to visit me and I'm going to be in a car crash or something's going to happen, something terrible. And that preoccupation with the uncertain or the unknown is where a lot of my frailty comes from, because I know that if something were to happen, let's say I was in an auto accident and somebody was injured, then the ensuing uncertainty around, insurance coverage, being sued, a legal case, the ramifications for that person, them having been injured, it would keep me in a state of existential limbo, of great angst, anxiety, and then depression. I would perseverate and start to feel like I'm totally helpless, that I'm doomed, my life is over, my career is over, there's no point living, and my brain would kind of go on this spiral into deep anxiety and depression. And I wouldn't be able to bounce back like, let's say, most people would. Most people being people who are not structurally oppressed, i.e. neurotypical folks. And I could tap my friends for support, but for me, it can be really difficult, I've noticed, as a neurodivergent, is that I'm not used to asking for support because I've often felt like I was shut down when I did reach for it. I reached for it from the wrong people at the wrong time, or I didn't have quite the foundation of a relationship that I would have needed with that person to get the support I needed, or people were just unresponsive, minimizing, dismissive. And so I'm even more reluctant because of those formative experiences when I was younger that seem to validate my perception that people weren't reliable and that I can't turn to them for support when I'm going through strife. So I keep it to myself and I silently implode. So other people and our relationships with other people tend to be a source of resilience, but when we isolate and avoid and we become distrustful of people because of these negative past experiences, we don't know how to tap it and we don't feel comfortable tapping it. So we can't access that source of resilience, so we end up, like I mentioned, having that gooey inside and feeling really frail. And I often feel like I'm one terrible event away from my life collapsing because I can know in advance that I need to build my resilience. I can take the steps that I can, but some of the avoidance, some of that reluctance to access support can be hardwired in, and I still feel, even knowing what I know now, that I feel uncomfortable asking for it or doubtful that people can soothe me. And often because of perseverative thinking, that persistence of my mind and thinking over and over and looping about a certain thought, especially when something bad happens, no amount of reassurance can often work because it seems like a bottomless pit of woe and worry that I get stuck in. And I tend to retreat and withdraw when I'm going through hardship. And I think for human beings, neurodivergents might have different ways of coping with disaster. But as human beings, universally speaking, we need other people to co-regulate. So when we isolate through an adaptive strategy that might have worked in a certain context, and we've developed that as a knee-jerk response, especially when bad things happen, it's maladaptive, we can't access the support we need, and then we can't recover with the kind of resilience, we can't bounce back with the kind of resilience that would otherwise be normative or considered normative for most folks who are not neurodivergent, who are not marginalized and oppressed. Have you struggled with this weird balance of having resilient adaptive techniques and strategies that served you in a certain context, but then finding they can suddenly be completely useless, or they're insufficient, or they don't quite work outside of a certain context? Have you found that through avoidance and isolation that you haven't developed that kind of real, true resilience that allows you to cope with all of life's many travails? I would love to hear all about your experiences.